Okay, here we go. This is the third video on Purim. I'm trying to go as fast as I can, but 30 minutes is not a long time to explain this stuff. So I was reading you a scripture, and it was verse 13. If it pleases the king, Esther answered, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow. Also, and let Haman's sons be hanged in the gallows. Now listen, these 10 sons have already been killed. Now does she want to hang 10 dead bodies in the gallows? What is the point of that? Now let me explain. Okay, the word tomorrow in Hebrew is makar. I don't know how to say it, but that's how it's spelled, M-A-C-H-A-R. That word can either mean tomorrow, the next day, or it can mean a time in the future. And let me show you in Exodus 13:14. Tomorrow is used as a time in the future and not just the next day. And 13:14 is right here. In the days to come. That's makar. So it's the same word used here. And so this is a prophetic statement by Esther. She is not wanting to hang 10 dead bodies. She is giving us a prophetic statement that this same event is going to happen in the future. And we'll get into that in a minute because I want to finish the story. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman, or they hung the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. I want to tell you, in verse 13 it says that that they're going to avenge their enemies. The word avenge in Hebrew is not hatred or anger, acted out in hatred or anger. It does not signify a violent emotion of a resentful spirit, but a steady resolve of doing what's right. God himself is an avenger. Isaiah 124 says, therefore the Lord Almighty, the Mighty One of Israel, declares, I will vent my wrath on my foes and will avenge myself on my enemies. These are not just neutral people. These are his enemies that he is going to avenge himself, and that is to make things right again. There's other verses, but I'm just going to keep going on. Let me get back to Esther. I'll be right back. So the Jews celebrated both the 13th and the 14th day of Adar. And there was joy and feasting and giving presents to each other. Verse 20, chapter 9, Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned to joy and their mourning was turned into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe these days as a day of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should be come back on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hung in the gallows. Therefore these days were called Purim, from the word pur, because everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it upon themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote the full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. So we're at the end of the chapter, at the end of the book. Chapter 19 or chapter 10 is just one paragraph, and it says King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. You know, Mordecai could have been soaked up in power and prestige and fame and money and royalty, but he didn't. He remained humble, and he looked after his people, the Jews. Hold on. Now let me tell you something that is very fascinating, even more so than the what I just told you about with Samuel and the Agagites. This is wow. In the Jewish scrolls where this story is written, it's called the Megillah. The names of Haman's 10 sons are listed on top of one another. 3 Hebrew letters are written noticeably smaller than the rest, and 1 letter is written noticeably larger than the rest. The abnormality appears in every authentic Megillah scroll. When you add up the numbers, it's called gematria, because the Hebrews don't have numbers. They only have letters, and they add up to numbers. If you add up the numbers of those 4 Hebrew letters, it comes to 5707. The year 5707 of the earth is our year 1946. The 7th day of Sukkot. Remember, we talked about the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, and how it lasted 7 days, and the last day was the highlight. The last day is called Hoshana Rabbah, and it's Tishri 21, and it's the day that God's verdicts are sealed. Now in 1946, Tishri 21 landed on October 16th. On October 16th, 1946, 10 leading Nazis, second to only Hitler, were hung in Nuremberg, Germany. There were originally 23 Nazis that were all on trial. 12 were sentenced and executed using the normal way of execution of the firing squad. 1 Nazi committed suicide. That leaves 10. These 10 men chose to be hung rather than standing in front of the firing squad. The last of the 10, his name was Julius Streicher. He walked up the steps of the gallows, and as they put the noose around his head, he screamed out with evil in his eyes, "Purim Fest 1946. How did he know that? It is said that Hitler is a direct descendant of Agag, King Agag. This tomorrow that Esther had decreed with King Xerxes happened on October 16th, 1946, when these 10 Nazi soldiers, out to do the same things that Haman's 10 sons were doing, is extinguishing the Jewish race. It happened on tomorrow, on the day that God seals his verdicts, October 16th, 1946. They were literally, if you think about it, if Haman is the descendant of King Ag, then those 10 sons of Hitler, 10 men of Hitler, are literally the sons of Haman, descendants of the sons of Haman. So, we get to the bigger picture of what is Purim. Purim is a day where God delivers his people out of tribulation. So anything could be a Purim. Anything that delivers you out of a terrible situation into the hands of God. You could call it your own personal Purim. Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, sometimes is referred to in the scripture as Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippur is the greatest Purim of our time because he is our atonement. He rescued us from the clutches of Satan and crushed Satan on Nisan 14 when Haman gave a picture of Satan, gave this awful edict to destroy all his people. And so the day that Jesus died was the greatest Purim of all, wasn't it? That he rescued his people out of the hands of Satan. And what is going to be the greatest Purim of all? The final Purim, when Jesus returns and raptures the church from this world and from the hands of Satan himself. I wanted to tell you too that Jesus did celebrate Purim in the Bible, and I'm going to show you. It's in the book of John, chapter 5, and in verse 9 you will see that let's see. Let me find it. Hold on. Okay, so we're in John chapter 5, and it says, sometime later, Jesus went up to, it's always up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem's on a hill, for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. But what the point is that he went to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals, and in chapter 8 it says that the day on which that was the day that he healed a man that was unable to walk, and said get up, and he picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. So there have been researchers to look back on this, and they say that between the years AD 35 and AD 25, the only Jewish festival to land on a Sabbath was Purim. So Jesus did celebrate Hanukkah and Purim. And so what a wonderful story. This story has a wonderful heroine named Esther, one of the sweetest, noblest women in all of Scripture, an orphan girl living in exile, swept into the limelight, and yet remaining unspoiled and gentle, but with courage and bravery, not shrinking from danger, declaring, if I perish, I perish. So I encourage you to read the book. It's a lot more exciting than what I have really set place, because I'm giving you a lot of background stuff that's not readily viewed. But if you read the book yourself, it's just an exciting and fun story. But I wanted to tell you one additional thing about this holiday. A lot of Christians don't celebrate Halloween. because Halloween is not based on anything good. And if you look at the origins of it, you know, it's a black Sabbath for Satan, and there's human and animal sacrifices on this day, on that day, and there's evil spirits going. It's just a miserable day. If you have anything to do with the occult, then you would know what was going on that day. And so, you know, we tell our kids the origin of every other holiday, right? We tell them Christmas is Jesus is born, or Santa Claus. We tell them the meaning for every holiday. What do you tell them when you talk about Halloween? What is the origin? What is the meaning? So you have to go back and look at that. But in case you don't celebrate Halloween, there is a time that you can celebrate with your kids, and that's on Purim. The Jewish custom on Purim is that the kids dress up and they do Halloween. Well, they dress up in costumes, and it's replaced by a lot of Christians with they replace Halloween with Purim. And what the kids used to do, now they dress up in all kinds of costumes, anything you can think of. But what they originally did was the girls' children would dress up as Queen Esther, the boy would dress up as Haman, and they would reenact this whole scene that was going on between Haman and Esther. And every time Esther would say something, the crowd would say, "Yay, yay, yay!" And every time Haman said something, the kids boo. And so this was their fun and excitement and their own kind of Halloween. And so I'd encourage you, if you want your kids to have fun and dress up and go to some functions with some other kids, then that's great instead of Halloween. So that's something that you can do. But what people normally do on Purim is they read the book of Esther, and they have a big meal, and they give a gift to the poor. And so it's coming up, like I said, on March 6th. So sit down with your family and have a wonderful meal and read the book of Esther with your kids, and tell them the value of remaining faithful and humble. I mean, you have Mordecai and Esther, the only humble people in this story, and they were the ones that were elevated to high authority. And that's what God will do for us if we remain humble, obedient to his word. He will lift us up. The world will never